Good evening. Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. My name is Gus Cantivero. In our top story tonight, CNN has released a new favorability poll conducted by ORC International. The poll places President Barack Obama's favorability above 50% for the first time since the alleged assassination of Osama bin Laden in May of 2011. The poll puts the president's favorability at 56% and 42% unfavorable, leaving him with a 14% margin. Republican candidates for president, Mitt Romney has 37% and 49%. Rick Santorum has 35 and 42. Ron Paul has 35 and 38. And Newt Gingrich has 24% and a staggering 60% unfavorable rating. Gloria Borger, CNN's chief political analyst, made an appearance on the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, where she asserted the numbers are a result of the growing number of people who believe that the economy is good, which currently sits at 31%, up from 18 in January. MSNBC's Morning Joe also did a report on the poll findings. On the program, host Joe Scarborough pointed out Mitt Romney's -12 and how Romney has repeatedly used his electability as his best asset to woo Republican voters away from his competition. Newt Gingrich and his -36 were also mentioned, but it's worth noting that Ron Paul was not mentioned in either outlet's report. More on that in a moment. In head-to-head matchups, the poll states that Obama defeats Romney 56-40 and defeats Santorum 57-39. Most importantly in the poll findings are the numbers for independent voters. Among independents, Obama leads the pack with a 52% favorable rating, followed by Ron Paul at 46%. Romney and Santorum with 35% each and Gingrich with 24%, calling into question the whole issue of the supposed viability or electability of Mitt Romney to begin with, given the importance of independent voters. Viability is the term that's been repeated ad nauseum this election cycle by the mainstream media and the Republican talking heads, and they all agree on one thing: Ron Paul doesn't have it. But what is viability? How is it determined? What is it measured by? Who determines who is viable or electable and who isn't? When speaking to Republicans, I almost always hear that they like Ron Paul, but they just wish he was more viable. When speaking to independents and liberals, I always hear that they wish they had a viable alternative candidate. How is it that this phrase keeps turning up? Well, most likely it's the result of the branding and the use of buzzwords in the media. Alternative candidates are always surrounded by the use of keywords that brand them, their names and their movements. Regardless of how popular their viewpoints are, people are always told that they just don't have popular support. The establishment machines go to work to diffuse any potential movements before it starts. We were told that a vote for Ross Perot was a vote for Bill Clinton, that a vote for Ralph Nader and Ron Paul in 2008 was a vote for Barack Obama. Now, through the internet and the use of social networking, users of the internet have the ability to see that there really is popular support out there, that they're not alone. And the mainstream media has had to go into propaganda overdrive to counteract this momentum. In 2008, Ron Paul was completely ignored, but this time it's impossible to ignore him, and so they resort to slander. Whenever he is interviewed, questions are never substantial. Whenever his name is mentioned, negative comments always surround it. The object is to shut down original thought. It's clear that Americans reject the mainstream ideology with the lack of voter turnout in the general elections and especially in the primaries. 1/3 of Americans are registered as independents, and 42% of Americans have described themselves as independent. But the exclusion of independents in primaries forces them to take a side in order to be a part of the process. If the Republican establishment was really serious about actually winning an election and choosing a candidate who would best represent the American people, they would choose someone who does well with the youth, independents, and has an appeal for low-income voters. According to CNN, Ron Paul does best with independents, getting 46%, followed by Santorum and Romney, each with 35%. Romney and Santorum pull in 60% of Republicans, but that doesn't help them in a general election. It only helps them in the primaries. If this country had a primary for independents, the results would certainly be entirely different. People would leave the Republican and Democrat parties in droves. At the end of the poll, we see new numbers that show Obama defeating Romney and Santorum by 14%. How are we to believe that he's the most electable candidate? The establishment doesn't always have to engage in vote rigging. They just simply have to deter people, and that's usually enough. For example, exit polls on the East Coast deter West Coast voters from voting at the end of the day because they believe it's already been decided. Americans have to decide to reject the herd mentality and cut their own paths. Politics and life are not team sports, but the division in popular culture is meant to make you feel alone and powerless if you stray. It's how we are controlled. I have long believed that if people voted their conscience and ignored the mainstream in politics, that the outcomes of the elections would be a world apart. Thank you for joining us. This is the Infowars Nightly News.